My first exposure to artisan bread was really when I was growing up as a child in Sacramento. My grandmother was Italian, the quintessential Italian cook. Everything she made tastes wonderful. I'm not sure she owned a measuring cup or measuring spoons. Everything was a little bit of this and a pinch of that. And we would go over to her house for dinner almost every Sunday. And she didn't always make bread, but you knew when she did, because when you opened that door, the smell just hit you. And it was Nana made bread. You knew that was going to be a good night. I started making bread about 15 years ago. I joined a recipe cookbook club. One of the books I got was a book by Nancy Silverton called The Breads of La Brea Bakery. When I first opened it up, it had a very inspirational first chapter. It was all about how she spent a year trying to figure out how to make the best sourdough or naturally leavened bread. And then the second chapter got into exactly how to make your own sourdough starter and how to make a simple country white loaf of sourdough bread. And that chapter basically scared me off for about 3 years because it was intense, I'll put it that way. So I basically put it away and I just kind of forgot about it. And then about 3 years later, my wife and I had a vacation planned, but I had 2 weeks off and she had 1 week off. So the extra week that I had, I discovered that cookbook and I opened it up again and I read the first chapter, inspirational again. I read the second chapter and it was still a little scary, but for some reason it also sort of was a challenge. And I took that challenge and I took that week and I made my first starter. And I have not looked back since. You know, I mean, it was 2 weeks of watching a starter grow and then 2 days to make a loaf of bread and really with no idea how it was going to come out. So it was, you know, it was equally exciting and sort of scary because that's a whole lot of time, and if it doesn't turn out, you know, what are you going to do? So I made it the first time, and it wasn't bad. It wasn't as good as I was hoping for. The thing about naturally leavened sourdough bread is really almost the worst loaf of bread that you can make. It's still better than what you can buy at the supermarket. For about 10 years, I made the Nancy Silverton Country White Bread Loaf and was happy to do just that. I would make a couple of loaves. Every now and then I would make 4 or 5 loaves. Then one day my wife for Valentine's Day got me a cookbook for bread that was slightly different. It was a different process, different program we call it. And before I knew it, I was making baguettes. I was making ciabatta and focaccia, and that's when things sort of exploded. I started making many, many loaves a weekend, so we couldn't eat all that bread. But I still wanted to make it because I was sort of on a path to really mastering the various different types of bread making. I started offering to my friends, and the easiest way for me to do that at the time was to set up a group on one of the popular social media websites. And I invited my friends to be part of that group. And I said, look, at one point somebody made a joke about people driving up to my house and me coming out to meet them in the driveway. They said something like, what are you running, some kind of a speakeasy? So I named the group the Speakeasy Bakery. We started sort of a whisper campaign. And the Speakeasy Bakery was this place that nobody really knew where it was or exactly what it was. And before I knew it, I had 1,000. 1,500, 2,000. So I've got about 2,100 members in that group right now. And I got together with my friend, Todd Wilson, and we decided that we had an audience. We might be able to do something with this. So we started a nonprofit called Feed SCV, SCV standing for Santa Clarita Valley, which is where we live. So initially when we raised funds, we were actually giving it to other nonprofits that were addressing food-related issues. So there's a local food pantry, there's a local homeless shelter, there's a local domestic violence center. At some point, we wanted to see if there were some gaps that could be filled, and there were. And that is a weekend backpack program for children. And these are kids that get help during the week with breakfast, lunch, maybe dinner from the school, directly at the school. But when they go home on the weekend, they're pretty much on their own. So we went to the local school boards and pitched them an idea. At one point, we'd built a pretty strong connection to most of the very good restaurants in Santa Clarita. And Todd came up with the idea to have an evening where we would auction off the services of these chefs, whether it was a nice dinner, like a private dinner, or maybe a cooking class or something like that. So once again, we call in our volunteers and got people that had been involved in other charities and doing events like this. And it turned out unbelievable. Like, people were just throwing money at us. It was a really fun evening. We raised a lot of money and it got our backpack program off the ground. So the first time that I cut into that sourdough bread, it was, magical, might be overstating it, but it's when that bread knife bites into that crust, and it's just a really hard, really robust crust. and literally the whole family was standing there watching. And so I cut the whole thing up. That loaf was gone in minutes. Bread, to me, it represents giving. It's always been about giving back, giving to people, helping people, and the beginning of the nonprofit really gave that legs.
Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode of My First Dish. Please hit that like button and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any videos from My First Dish.